Okay, so 2-to-1 counterpoint. What is new in 2-to-1 counterpoint? Now we're dealing with a downbeat as well as an upbeat. And this is because before in 1-to-1 counterpoint, we were dealing with a ratio of 1-to-1, 1-to-1 counterpoint. So we had an equal ratio of notes in our given melody as well as our counterpoint. But now 2-to-1 counterpoint, we have a different ratio. So every time that our given melody has one note, our counterpoint has two notes. How the species counterpoint is notated is you have a 2-to-1 ratio symbolized as your whole notes being your 1 and your half notes being your 2. So in other words, every time there's a whole note, there's two half notes. And this plays into the metric hierarchy of the notes, to where in this scenario we would actually be in 2-2 time. So every time there's two half notes, that's one of our measures. So in other words, we only have a downbeat and an upbeat. And if you don't know, the downbeat is actually the first and the strongest beat of the measure, and the upbeat is the second and the weakest beat of the measure. But as we look over on the right here, we can see that if we're in 4/4 time, which is common time, so it's the most common, we can look at each one of our downbeats as each one of our quarter notes downbeat, and we can look at the eighth notes as upbeats. So you can see that this kind of transfers into smaller and bigger categories, but it is also often very common to symbolize the first beat of a 4/4 measure as the downbeat, the second as the upbeat because it's not as strong, the third as a downbeat again because it's strong, and then the fourth as again an upbeat. Also, measures can have downbeats and upbeats. So if we had 4 measures and it was a song of, let's just say it's 4/4. So the first measure will be actually a stronger measure, and just like in our 4/4 time, our second measure is going to be a weaker one, and that also is in 2/2 time. But then just like 4/4 time and 2/2 time, either one, the third measure again would also be another strong downbeat measure, and then the fourth measure would then be again an upbeat, weaker measure. So when you're composing music, you can think about this, that your measure itself can have downbeats and upbeats. Your beats themselves, as in your quarter notes in 4/4 time or your half notes in 2/2 time, can have downbeats and upbeats themselves. So there's a lot of different ways that you can be looking at downbeats and upbeats, but in 2-to-1 counterpoint, we're just looking at the ratio of 2-to-1. So to make it simpler, when the two notes intersect, as you can see, they intersect on a downbeat. And then when the note is by itself in 2-to-1 counterpoint, that's an upbeat because there's no given melody note down there. So here's the given melody that we're going to be working with in this video, but first I'm going to show you some examples so we can actually understand 2-to-1 counterpoint. Consonant harmonic intervals can happen on the upbeat or the downbeat. It's also known as your perfect or imperfect intervals, your first, your third, your fifth, your sixth, your octave, and your 10th. Leaping twice in the same direction is more acceptable in 2-to-1 than 1-to-1. Okay, as you can see here, the counterpoint leaps 2 times in order to achieve consonant melodic intervals within the counterpoint. And within the given melody and the counterpoint, you can see the C and the E here create a 10th because the E is an octave up. Then that moves in contrary motion to an 8th. And since we're not used to 2-to-1 counterpoint, you might wonder why this is an 8th, or you might click with it. And that's because since the C is a whole note, the C is still sounding for this whole area right here. It's still sounding in this upbeat. So then we have a C and a C playing together on the upbeat, and then that moves again in contrary motion to an imperfect consonant interval of a third, where we have F and A. So as you can see, the counterpoint leaps a third, and then it leaps another third. And in 1-to-1 counterpoint, you wouldn't really have the melody leaping a third and then a third again. And if you did see that, you probably wouldn't see that very much. It wouldn't be a very common thing. But in 2-to-1 counterpoint, it is a lot more acceptable because it helps you stay within the parameters of hitting those imperfect and perfect consonances in the right spots, as well as trying to have a good amount of voice leading, because voice leading is really good between your stepwise motion, but the next best thing is your thirds. Once you go past thirds, you do go into some higher leaps that are a lot more distinguishable for your ears. And I wouldn't compare thirds to stepwise motion, but when you're doing voice leading, you'll see that a lot of times you're picking between going up a step and also a lot of times going up a third. And when it goes past that, you start to run into some more voice leading issues when you do that on the regular. Okay, here is a good tip. The only adjacent consonances formed above an interval are the 6th and the 5th. So if our counterpoint can stay about a fifth or a sixth away from the given melody, then it is able to step in stepwise motion using consonant intervals at the same time. Okay, so let's look at that. As you can see in our given melody in our counterpoint, we have a sixth at first, and then that moves to a fifth. Because we have a sixth above our given melody, and then a fifth above our given melody, you can see it's moving in stepwise motion. Then when it goes up to the F and the A, creating that third, you can see that right before it we had that G, so the G is moving in contrary motion to both the A and the F. So in 1-to-1 counterpoint, dissonances are not able to be used, but in 2-to-1 counterpoint, dissonant intervals may be used under two conditions. One, they must occur on an upbeat or a weak accented beat. And also, two, they must be approached and also left in a step in the same direction. So in other words, 2 steps up in a row or 2 steps down in a row surrounding our dissonant interval. So this is called a dissonant passing tone. So this is really good if you know your embellishing tones, because the passing tone is very simple. It's just a tone that passes between one chord tone to another chord tone, but this is a dissonant passing tone. So instead of looking at the passing tone in the middle of chord tones, the dissonant passing tone is going to act like that dissonant interval that passes in between the two other intervals surrounding it that are either your imperfect harmonic interval or your perfect harmonic interval. Since you can only have the dissonances on the upbeat, then surrounding that you're not going to have dissonances. Any diatonic dissonant interval may be used as a dissonant passing tone. So in other words, our second, fourth, seventh, and ninth, or any augmented or diminished interval, which here we're thinking diatonically, so that would be scale degrees 4 and 7, or in other words in solfege, fa and ti, or ti and fa. And this is because the 4th and the 7th degree create a tritone no matter which way. If it's the 7th and the 4th, or the 4th and the 7th, creating an interval, whether it's harmonic or melodic, you're going to be highlighting a tritone. Now, creating an analytic diagram in 2-to-1 counterpoint. This is important, and it is actually pretty simple. So to make our analytic diagram, we fill in the dissonant intervals with a filled in stemless head, like a quarter note without a stem. This is going to draw attention to the dissonant passing tone. Its nature is passing between two consonant intervals, and we want to show that visually. This expresses the hierarchy of the harmonies. After this, we slur the downbeat consonances with a solid slur. This slur will swoop over the dissonant passing tone. This slur is still in relationship to our slur used in 1-to-1 counterpoint exercises, because when you include a dissonant harmonic interval, it has to be surrounded by 2 notes a third apart, so the dissonance can sit right in the middle of those 2 notes. This is a must-follow rule where the dissonant harmonic interval must be approached as well as left by a step. So here's our dissonant harmonic interval, and we can see it's labeled like a quarter note. It's a filled-in note, and there's no stem. Okay, so it's like a stemless quarter note almost. This is how we're labeling it in the analytic diagram to draw attention to this dissonance. And then you can see we have these 2 notes a third apart surrounding it, connected with the slur. So the slurs are on the downbeats, the 2 notes that are meeting together. They're going over the upbeat, the dissonant passing tone, and they have to be a third apart, because whether they're being approached up or down, you can see they're moving in the same direction. So it's going down a step to the dissonant passing tone, then it's going down another step to the downbeat. So it's good to keep in mind that the given melody is always traveling in oblique motion when we think of the context of how it's harmonizing. And this is because, like I showed you, the given melody is traveling twice as slow, or in other words, a 1-to-2 ratio to the counterpoint. The given melody plays a full note while the counterpoint plays 2 notes. So in comparison to the counterpoint, the given melody is in oblique motion at all times with the counterpoint in every single upbeat, otherwise known as the weak beat. So it's good to think about the weak beat and the strong beat, because as you can see, we're placing this dissonant passing tone on a weak beat. We're not putting it on a strong beat. So this is very important and a really good thing to keep in mind when we're thinking about voice leading, using dissonant intervals, and also like things like highlighting tritones, which I'm going to get to in a little bit. So therefore, the 2 in 2-to-1 counterpoint refers to the counterpoint itself. Of course, you could always take this knowledge and use it when in a reverse situation, such as having eighth notes and figuring out effective counterpoint using quarter notes. So now we're going to get into everyone's favorite topic, parallel fifths. So remember, you can have consonant intervals in the up and down beats, but you got to be careful because look what happens here. Because we're using consonant intervals, but C to G creates a fifth. Then look at our next harmonic interval. We have another fifth. Just one step up, so we have parallel fifths. Parallel fifths or octaves in 2-to-1 counterpoint are just as bad for voice independence as in 1-to-1 counterpoint. In this instance, we have parallel fifths from an upbeat to a downbeat. This is not good because we have a fifth going in parallel motion to another fifth landing on a strong beat, otherwise known as the downbeat. Parallel fifths or octaves form in adjacent downbeats. The strong beats also do not sound good when trying to create independence in your voices. In this next example, we can see we have the interval of a fifth on both of our downbeats. And because it's hitting on both those strong beats, the emphasized beats, it's still going to be creating the sound of parallel fifths. A counterpoint note, in this case the C in the middle of the two fifths, is not enough to distract the listener from hearing the two parallel fifths since they are on the downbeats. So avoid parallel perfect consonances on downbeats that are one after another. However, everything changes when we look at upbeats. Parallel fifths and octaves are permitted when used between adjacent upbeats. Their position in the weak spot of the meter draws them away from the listener's attention. So if you're writing counterpoint for 2-to-1 and you need to use fifths, then you can use them on every upbeat of a phrase, and this will take away from the parallel fifth sound. The problem with adjacent downbeats is only a problem specifically with parallel motion. Direct motion to parallel intervals from downbeat to downbeat can be smoothed over based on what note is chosen for the upbeat. So here you can see we have E, C, and then we have D, A, so it's traveling to a fifth. And the fifth is also occurring on a downbeat, but here we add in the note G. G creates a leap down in our counterpoint, which then allows contrary motion to our fifth. So as you can see, this is between the downbeats, we still have that direct motion. So it's traveling in direct motion, and in 1-to-1 counterpoint, this is not something you'd want direct motion to a fifth, but here adding that G in the middle, we're adding some contrary motion on that upbeat. Next, we want to avoid outlining dissonant intervals between adjacent downbeats. So as you can see here in our counterpoint on our downbeats, we're highlighting the notes B and F. So we have that 7th degree and the 4th degree of C major, creating that tritone. An important exception to this would be large leaps are covered by a step in the opposite direction. So if we change this E and we put it up to a G, so as you can see now it's leaping up quite a large leap of a 6th, and it's being recovered down a step in the opposite direction. There is no oblique motion in 2-to-1 counterpoint. The result for the downbeat to the upbeat would be two notes being held out at the same length in comparison to the given melody itself. This is just 1-to-1 counterpoint, so we might as well just use whole notes and do 1-to-1 counterpoint instead of using oblique motion. On the other hand, if we're traveling from an upbeat to a downbeat using oblique motion, we would have a consonant harmonic suspension. This is not allowed in 2-to-1 counterpoint, so just know you can't use oblique motion. Here we have some 2-to-1 counterpoint written above a melody. This totally works, but it could be improved. It's very predictable and it's not very exciting. Overall, it's a good use of stepwise motion. The melody plays 3 notes down, and then from that it plays the same 3 notes up. So that adds to the predictability and takes away from the excitement. The second passing tone in particular, in other words, the second note B, it particularly sticks out in our ears because we already heard that same passing tone going down from these 2 notes, and now we're hearing the same passing tone going up to these 2 notes. Of course, this is staying within the rules, but again, it's boring. In order to add some nuance in this phrase, while still highlighting the same notes, we can do a few things. One idea could be adding a G in the first passing tone. Adding this G in the first passing tone is going to add some excitement and help to induce the second half of the phrase more. C down to G creates a leap using the 2 most stable scale degrees. Scale degrees 1 and 5. The G is then recovered in stepwise motion all the way up to C, where then it fills in the gap between the two C's where the listener would expect. This is known as the gap and fill method. When there's too much space between the intervals of the counterpoint melody, a leap of an octave can help solve this issue by quickly changing registers. Of course, a large leap should then be recovered in the opposite direction with a step. And in the case that leap covers a range of notes that we haven't yet heard in the melody, the listener will expect to hear the notes that fill in that gap. In 2-to-1 counterpoint, unison intervals may be permitted only on upbeats. The perfect consonances will also slow down the forward momentum of the melody, so they always need something to mitigate their nature. Before, in 1-to-1 counterpoint, the perfect consonances were approached in either contrary or oblique motion, while now they are placed in a weak spot of the meter, which deters their effect away from the listener. You can choose to start your counterpoint on either the downbeat or the upbeat. Whichever method that you choose to be the best will depend on your starting note, as well as your goal of motion and overall shape of the melody. There are two ways that you can choose to end your 2-to-1 counterpoint exercises. The first would be a half note cadence in the penultimate measure. Penultimate means second to last. So here we have a half note cadence, and it's built from the second degree of the scale. The counterpoint starts on the downbeat on the 6th degree of the scale, which is a fifth above our given melody. Then our counterpoint travels up a step to our 7th degree of the scale, creating a sixth with our given melody. So here we have that cadence of the 2nd degree and the 7th degree, creating that sixth, just like in 1-to-1 counterpoint. The only difference is that because we're doing 2-to-1 counterpoint, we're starting on the 6th degree, and then we're moving up to the 7th degree on the upbeat. This enables us to move in contrary motion in our upper and lower voice to create this cadence. And as you can see, I used a whole note in my last note of the cadence. This is good because you're ending it on a longer note, signifying that it's the end more. You can also do a whole note cadence for a counterpoint above a given melody. So just like in our 1-to-1 counterpoint, we have the 2nd and 7th degree, creating the 6th interval, which then moves in contrary motion to our 2 tonic notes, creating the octave. When composing the counterpoint below the given melody, you will have to leap up from the 5th scale degree to the 7th scale degree in the penultimate measure. And this is when we're using the half note cadence, so when we're using half notes in the penultimate, second to last measure, leading up to this cadence. You can see on the 2nd degree, we're forming our counterpoint below it on the 5th degree. As you can see below our given melody, we start on the 5th degree, which can be thought of as a compound perfect fifth. Then our counterpoint leaps up a third, where it lands on the 7th degree, in this case the note B, which then creates a 10th with B and D, which allows us to have a similar cadence stepping in contrary motion to our 2 tonic notes, creating the octave. But this time, instead of going in contrary motion from a 6th to an 8th, they're going from a 10th into an 8th. So as you can see, the bottom voice now is traveling up, and the upper voice is actually going down a step, versus before for the cadence in the upper counterpoint, we have the bottom voice going down a step, and we have the upper voice going up a step. So now if we do a whole note cadence for the counterpoint below the given melody, we're just going to create that 10th interval from the beginning, using the 2nd and the 7th degrees of the scale. Here we have the 2-to-1 counterpoint response given by Fuchs in D Dorian. So it's always good to analyze the given melody first. It's even better to sing it, and even better than that, sing it in solfege syllables. But I don't know if you want to listen to that, so I'm going to spare you from that, but know that's something really good to do. Let's analyze it. First, we can see the given melody starts on the note D. It's in D Dorian, so it's going to be using the notes of C major, but starting on D. We leap up a third to F, then we go down a step to E, back down to D again. Then we leap up a fourth to G, we go back down a step to F, and then from there we leap up a third to the given melody's high point of A, which then from there it goes stepwise motion all the way back down to D again. This response is good and it's its own thing. It has this repeating pattern throughout it while the given melody does its own thing. I think it's interesting because it highlights the fact that you have this kind of repeated melody for the most part throughout it, and then the given melody is doing its own thing. But typically in counterpoint exercises, you're not really looking for motivity or repeating certain things. So there are a few points that are weak and could be improved. The first thing is the counterpoint for the most part has a limited range of only a fourth. This is presented in the very first measure. You begin with this interval of a fourth, and then the rest of the melody basically stays within that parameter. This combined with the fact that there is no note that is making a large leap higher than any other note that is creating an obvious high point. In fact, there are only two notes that stick out in the counterpoint. First, the G right here, and then next the E right here. And the notes being used do not create a very good sense of resolution, being scale degrees 4 and 7 of D Dorian. Stable scale degrees would be the 1, 3, 5, and 6, since these are consonant intervals away from the tonic. Besides G and E, like I was saying, most of the melody is just doing the same thing. So for the most part, we just have stepwise motion traveling up the scale in the range of a fourth. By the final cadence, we're establishing the two notes D and D creating an octave. The only problem is by then we've heard the note D 5 times, so that may not help creating a very strong ending. The only difference is that right before the D, the C is raised up to a C sharp, creating a leading tone. Last, the melody is very motivic, so this is something we want to avoid in counterpoint exercises. We don't want a familiar melody going throughout our counterpoint. This is redundant because a lot of times in a song we're going to be creating motivity. So if we already have motivity in our counterpoint, we're going to have a lot of motivity going on. Again, you can always have too much of a good thing. You want to carefully add things to your music, like adding spices to a dish. You don't just want to add all the cumin to chicken, leave out all the garlic. You want to add a little bit of cumin, a little bit of garlic. You want to add some spice. W.A. Mozart comes along around 60 years later and adds some improvement to Fuchs's original counterpoint. First, he adds a high point and then establishes a low point a lot better. This extends the range in both directions, and also enables the melody to be more expedient when establishing a goal-directed shape. This allows Mozart to break away from the motivity that Fuchs established in his counterpoint. But good things come at a price. In order to add the high point, the note F highlights a dissonant diminished descending interval of a fifth between itself and the next downbeat B. So here we can see visually it's a downbeat because it's intersecting with the given melody. And we have the note F. Then you can see on the next downbeat we have the note B natural. This creates a tritone between two adjacent downbeats, something that we said we wanted to avoid. Earlier you can see that he avoids the tritone from F to B by turning B into B flat. In the Dorian mode, B flat is a common accidental to be used. This is to get rid of the tritone between B and F. You do this by flattening the 6th degree of the Dorian mode. But now we really want to be careful in doing this, because the only difference between Dorian and Aeolian, which is our natural minor, is that our 6th degree is natural in Dorian versus flat in minor. In minor, we have a flat 3, 6, and 7. In Dorian, we have a flat 3 and 7. In fact, the natural 6 is what makes the Dorian mode the Dorian mode. It basically is like a minor scale with a natural 6. Therefore, if you overuse the flat 6 in your counterpoint and your composition, you'll be using the Aeolian mode and not the Dorian mode. So if you want to stay in the Dorian mode, do not use the flat 6 often nor arbitrarily, but when it seems like the best choice or there is no other option. The next time F and B show up, he can't change the B to B flat because the note after B is an E. B flat would create an augmented fourth of E. If B flat was used instead, then the diatonic tritone would be avoided from B to F. But now you'd have a tritone with a non-diatonic note, and even worse, starting from a non-diatonic note, from that B flat to that E. So as you can imagine, that's probably worse than just having a diatonic tritone. Mozart choosing this shows that he sacrificed some small strengths of voice leading to bring about a better overall shape to the counterpoint, which in return outweighed the small loss of polyphony from the outlined fifth between two adjacent downbeats. Around 180 years later than Mozart, another way of writing counterpoint for the given melody appears in a book about counterpoint published by Felix Salzer and Karl Schachter. The first thing you might notice is that they add B flat to the key signature. Now the B flat will not have to be marked with an accidental. Next, there is a half note rest indicating that the counterpoint starts on the upbeat. This helps to break away from the repetition of tones in the counterpoint given to us by Fuchs. After this, the counterpoint follows the same pattern as Mozart's up until the second third of A and F. From A, the counterpoint leaps up a sixth to F, then it recovers in stepwise motion down. From here, it steps up 2 steps, then it leaps down a third, then from here, it leaps up a fourth to the high point of A. The high point occurs later than the given melody's high point, not at the same time. This helps it stick out as its own voice, something we really want to highlight. From this high point, A is not recovered as one might expect, but instead the next note again is A 1 octave down, allowing us to land in a lower register convincingly. And this is convincingly because we're using the same note just an octave down. Next, from this lower A, the melody uses stepwise motion up to the tonic of D using the notes B natural, C sharp, and finally D. From this lower A, the melody uses stepwise motion up to the tonic of D using the notes B natural, C sharp, and finally D, or in other words, traveling up the scale degrees 5, 6, 7, and then 1. All this while the given melody is traveling up in stepwise motion, starting below the high point with the median under the B natural with the supertonic and finally to the tonic. So as you can see here, we're starting on the 3rd degree of the scale, we're moving to the 2nd degree of the scale, and then the 1st degree in the scale. So there's some example of some responses, as well as the cantus firmus by itself in case you want to copy this down and solve for it. Okay, next we have 2 cantus firmus given to us by Johann Georg Albrechtsberger. We have one in F major, and then we have the next one in D Dorian. Personally, I kept F major with a B flat in the key signature, and I changed D Dorian without a B flat in the key signature. I like to do this because, like I was saying, you don't want to highlight the flat 6th interval too much in Dorian because then you're literally just going to be playing the natural minor scale. So I want to be able to see every time that I'm using this accidental. While in F major, B flat is a part of the key signature, so I want that note in there. So now compose 2-to-1 counterpoint above and below the given melody for both the F major and the D Dorian. Try to do at least 4 above and below for each one. Each time improving and learning from your past experience, and maybe even if you finish with not the best result, still keep that one so you can go back and look at it, because you might be able to pick out certain parts from it in your next exercise when you get a little stuck. Then at the end you might be able to take, let's say, 4 of your ideas, pick out the best moments from each of them, and figure out how to combine them to create a really good 2-to-1 counterpoint phrase. A challenge would be trying to compose the counterpoint without an instrument and then listening back to it and seeing if you were hearing things correctly in your head. Next, it's good to understand which scale degrees are actually forming each interval. And also next, being able to sing the melody out loud or in your head is also a really good exercise. Of course, it's always good to create the analytic diagrams. So in 2-to-1 counterpoint, all that we have to do is label the dissonant passing tones. Then we slur the leaps that are surrounding those dissonant passing tones. Next, we label the harmonic intervals. We don't do dotted slurs because there is no oblique motion in 2-to-1 counterpoint, and we're not going to be slurring every single leap because we use a lot more leaps in 2-to-1 counterpoint, and by the end of that it would look like a mess. So we're only going to be slurring the leaps that are surrounding our dissonant passing tone, and we're going to be identifying our dissonant passing tone by a filled-in note head without a stem. So as you can see, this is an analytic diagram created from Mozart's Counterpoint from Fuchs's given melody. You can see he only used one dissonant passing tone of a fourth throughout the entire thing. Everything else uses consonant intervals, which is really good, but remember that dissonant intervals are actually the best for voice leading independence, so do not be afraid to use them when approaching them properly. Next, I think it's really good to isolate the given melody and the counterpoint, look at them by themselves. And with this, we can create an analytic diagram of each one of them separately without creating a mess. So we have our given melody, and I'm going to slur each one of the leaps, and I'm also going to label each one of the leaps. So you can see we start off with the leap of a third, we go down stepwise motion. Each time there's stepwise motion, of course, it's not going to be slurred. Go down stepwise motion again, then we leap up the interval of a fourth. Go down a step again, leap up the interval of a third, and then we go step all the way back to our tonic. This helps us understand the fact of there are a few leaps here. We have a third right in the beginning, then we have a fourth right after going down a few, and then right after the fourth we recover it down, but we go right back up a third again. So don't be afraid of using some leaps here and there to make stuff interesting within your given melody or within your counterpoint. Just make sure you're following the parameters for the most part, and this will help you get that voice leading independence. Next, we can look at the counterpoint, and we can see that it leaps up a fourth, then it leaps down a fourth, then it goes up in stepwise motion twice to leap down a fourth again, then it goes stepwise motion again, leaps up another third, stepwise motion, another third, stepwise motion, a third, a fourth, another fourth, stepwise motion, another fourth, stepwise motion, another fourth, and then stepwise motion back to the tonic. Whoa, we have a lot of leaps here. So remember, leaps are a lot more acceptable in 2-to-1 counterpoint than in 1-to-1 counterpoint. So look at Mozart's counterpoint here. So looking at Mozart's counterpoint here, we only have 10 cases of stepwise motion throughout the counterpoint, and we also have 10 leaps in our counterpoint. So we have an equal amount of leaps as stepwise motion in our counterpoint. This is much different than 1-to-1 counterpoint, as you can see. But using these leaps is helping us stay within the parameters of using the perfect and imperfect consonances where we need them, allowing us to add dissonance where we need them as well, and in conclusion, creating voice leading independence. Okay, so for at-home work, I created a little plan for you. Like I said, it's really good to do at least 4 of each of these, but we're going to start off doing 2 of each of these to not overload things. We can go back later and we can add an additional 2 after everything if we want to, and if we think that we can add some improvement. First, we're going to start off with Fuchs's given melody in D Dorian. We're going to start by writing 2 counterpoint above and 2 counterpoint below. Next, we're going to go to Albrechtsberger's exercises. We're going to create counterpoint for the F major 2 times above. And then again, we're going to do 2 in F major, but below. Then we're going to do 2 in Dorian above, as well as 2 in Dorian below. Doing this should give you a really good start. And then, like I said, from here, you can go back and you can say, okay, actually, I thought of some better ways to solve these. And you can add 2 more additional to each one. After doing 4 of each one, you can see if you've gotten the idea or if you think you need to do some more. So that's it for this video. If you have any questions, leave it in the comments. And also, if you'd like me to look over your counterpoint and see if it's correct, if it follows the rules, if it has any mistakes, I would love to do that. So if you want to email it to me or anything like that, just let me know in the comments, and I would love to do something like that. Thank you very much.